The first time my boss threatened to demote me, he did it with a smile. "Olivia," Daniel Mercer said, folding his manicured hands on the glass conference table, "we've been reviewing performance metrics. There are concerns." Concerns. That word again. I sat straight in the leather chair, navy blazer crisp, hair pulled into a sleek low bun. Outside the 42nd floor windows, Manhattan glittered like it belonged to people who never heard words like concerns. "I increased quarterly revenue by 18%, I replied calmly, "and secured the Ardent acquisition." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, but leadership isn't just about numbers." There it was. I was 32, young for a chief strategy officer, younger still to be a woman sitting at a table dominated by men who'd played golf together since the Reagan administration. And I was outperforming them. He leaned back. "The board feels you may be better suited stepping back into a senior advisory role." Advisory role. Corporate code for demotion, without calling it that. I stared at him. "You want me out of executive decisions," I said evenly. He shrugged. "It's a strategic realignment." No, it was insecurity. And they had no idea what they were about to trigger. Because buried in my employment contract, page 47, section 12.4, was a clause Daniel had skimmed and dismissed 3 years ago. A $60 million performance-triggered bonus clause tied to a liquidity event. And I had just secured the biggest acquisition in company history. Chapter 2, the clause they forgot. 3 years earlier, when I negotiated my contract, they thought they were being generous. I had left a rival firm after turning around a collapsing division. Mercer Global needed fresh blood. The board wanted someone bold but controllable. They miscalculated. During negotiations, I'd insisted on a performance-based incentive structure tied to valuation growth and acquisition execution. They agreed. Why? Because at the time, Mercer Global's valuation had plateaued. They assumed no one could push it high enough to trigger the payout cap. They underestimated me. The clause was simple. If company valuation increased by 250% within 5 years under strategic initiatives led by me, and if a major liquidity event occurred, I would receive 2.5% of the transaction value, uncapped. When I signed, the company was valued at $800 million. Last week, we finalized acquisition, talks valuing us at $2.4 billion. Do the math. 2.5% of $2.4 billion. $60 million. And Daniel was trying to demote me before the board ratified the deal. If they reassigned me out of an executive decision-making role before the vote, they might attempt to argue I was no longer the active strategic lead, potentially voiding the clause. Cute. But they forgot one thing. I wrote the execution roadmap. Every document, every strategic initiative, every milestone. My fingerprints were on everything. And I kept receipts. Chapter 3, the setup. The day after Daniel's strategic realignment speech, HR emailed me. Subject line, role transition discussion. I almost laughed. I walked into the follow-up meeting with my personal attorney on speakerphone, muted. Daniel didn't know that part. "Olivia," he began, "this is simply about team cohesion." "Of course," I said sweetly. "Before we continue, can you clarify something?" He blinked. "What?" "If I step out of my current role before the acquisition vote next month, does the board believe that impacts my performance compensation structure?" Silence. A flicker in his eyes. There it was. He recovered quickly. Compensation matters can be reviewed after restructuring. Translation, we're hopping you won't fight it. I slid a thin, leather folder across the table. Inside was a printed copy of my contract with highlighted sections and legal annotations. "I'd advise reviewing section 12.4 carefully," I said. Daniel didn't touch it. "What are you implying? he asked tightly. I'm not implying anything, I said calmly. I'm reminding you. He finally opened the folder and watched the color drain from his face. Chapter 4, Panic in the Boardroom. By Friday, the atmosphere had changed. I wasn't invited to an emergency executive session, which was adorable, because as a voting officer and strategic lead on the acquisition, excluding me was a direct violation of governance rules. I walked into that boardroom uninvited. 12 men, one stunned silence. Olivia, one of the older board members, began, "This is a closed session." I'm aware, I said, and as the architect of the $2.4 billion acquisition currently under discussion, I'm legally required to be present. Daniel looked furious. I remained poised. One of the independent directors cleared his throat. We've been reviewing compensation implications. Of course you have. I set down a USB drive. Before we proceed, I'd like legal counsel to review the timeline documentation tied to valuation growth under my strategic directives. Daniel snapped, "This isn't necessary." Oh, I smiled. It absolutely is. Chapter 5, The Numbers Don't Lie. The independent legal advisor projected my documentation on the screen. Slide after slide. Revenue growth curves. Market expansion strategies. Cost reduction models. Every milestone aligned with my leadership initiatives. Every board approval documented with my name attached. And finally, projected acquisition valuation, $2.4 billion. Triggered clause payout, $60 million. Silence filled the room. One director whispered, "Jesus." Daniel tried one last move. If Olivia transitions roles before deal closure. The legal advisor cut him off. The clause triggers based on valuation event during active leadership period. Attempting reassignment to avoid payout could constitute bad faith. Bad faith. 2 words no public company wants near its name. I folded my hands. I have no interest in litigation, I said smoothly. I simply expect contractual integrity. Translation. Try me. Chapter 6, The Real Reason. After the meeting, one board member, Thomas Grant, caught up with me in the hallway. "Off the record," he said quietly, "Daniel feels threatened." I know. He didn't expect you to outperform him. I smiled faintly. That's not my problem. But it went deeper. Daniel had positioned himself as the visionary CEO. The acquisition success would cement his legacy. Instead, analysts were already calling it Olivia Chen's strategic coup in financial media leaks. And he couldn't stand it. This wasn't about money. It was about ego. Unfortunately for him, ego doesn't override contract law. Chapter 7, The Vote. The acquisition vote happened 3 weeks later. I wore white. Not for innocence. For victory. The board approved the deal unanimously. Stock surged 11% within hours. Financial networks buzzed. Internally, Daniel avoided eye contact. 2 days later, I received formal confirmation. Performance incentive triggered. $60 million payable upon transaction close. I stared at the number. $60 million. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I simply felt validated. Every late night, every dismissal, every subtle condescension in conference rooms where men repeated my ideas 5 minutes later and got credit. It was worth exactly $60 million. Chapter 8, The Final Attempt. Daniel wasn't done. He called me into his office one last time. "Olivia," he said stiffly, "there may be reputational consequences if this becomes public." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean honoring a legally negotiated compensation agreement?" He leaned forward. "Optics matter." I stood. "Then perhaps next time, don't threaten to demote the woman who just made your company worth 3 times more." He said nothing. Because he couldn't. Chapter 9, The Power Shift. The media found out anyway. Headlines exploded. Young female executive secures $60 million bonus after landmark acquisition. Investors loved it. The stock climbed further. Suddenly, I wasn't a cohesion risk. I was the future. 3 board members privately approached me about long-term leadership planning. Translation. They were considering replacing Daniel. I didn't push. I didn't need to. Power doesn't shout. It waits. Chapter 10, The Exit Strategy. 6 months later, Daniel resigned. Personal reasons. Of course. The board offered me interim CEO. I declined. Instead, I negotiated something better. Equity. Real control. And a seat where no one could ever threaten to realign me again. Epilogue, the lesson. The day my $60 million hit my account, I sat alone in my apartment overlooking the skyline. I thought about that first meeting. The smile. The word concerns. They thought I was ambitious but naive. Smart but manageable. Successful but replaceable. They forgot one rule. Never underestimate the woman who reads the fine print. Because sometimes the quietest clause in a contract becomes the loudest answer in the room. And when my boss threatened to demote me, he didn't realize he was activating the most expensive lesson of his career. $60 million worth of it.